Chaos on the highway. A pedestrian bridge collapses in Northeast D.C.
It was like boom, like a boom. It just crashed down.
Close calls for drivers, and it's cutting off entire communities nearby.
We utilize that pedestrian bridge to get to our relatives. I have cousins in Kenilworth.
Tonight, the traffic nightmare as we head into the morning. Plus, brand new information on what happened the last time this bridge was inspected. Live from the nation's capital, this is WUSA 9 News at 11. It is the big story that impacts so many of us. A bridge collapsed on a D.C. highway. Someone could have been killed. Thankfully, that didn't happen. People were injured, and there are growing questions about the safety of this pedestrian bridge over 295. Let's get a live view from the scene from Sky 9. Still a lot of activity there and a mess. Crews are cleaning things up. Good evening. I'm Leslie Foster, and we just got some breaking information in on this within the last 90 minutes. D.C.'s deputy mayor now says this bridge was rated in poor condition earlier this year. That is different from what the mayor said this afternoon. The city hopes to have the highway back open by rush hour tomorrow morning. This is a big story, so you know what to expect from this team. Every angle covered. Get Up DC traffic specialist Michelle Logan has your workarounds. John Henry's been talking to neighbors stranded by this. But up first, Tom Dempsey. He joins us live from the scene. This is DC's 295 near Kenilworth Avenue. Tom, you've been there for hours now. What do you know? The news at 11 is all over breaking news here in our backyard. A day that will go down in history for the wrong reasons. Good evening. I'm Leslie Foster. By now, you know, rioters stormed Capitol Hill. They made it inside. They're here to protest the election results, and things escalated fast. There is a lot to this story. We've got new reporting, and we're going to put it into perspective for you. So here is where things stand right now. There's a curfew in effect for D.C. Police are stationed across the city. They've spent the night clearing the crowds from Capitol Hill. They've made arrests. We also know a woman was shot in the Capitol today. Just a few hours ago, D.C. police confirmed she died from her injuries. Also breaking, lawmakers returned to Capitol Hill this evening to continue counting the Electoral College votes. This is the final step needed to certify the results for President-elect Joe Biden. This is the kind of coverage you come to expect from our News at 11 team. We're going to walk you through what happened, what happens next, and you'll hear the story from people who were working inside the Capitol. I want to begin with John Henry. He's live on Capitol Hill. Some of President Trump's supporters are still there. So are police. John, how are things looking right now?
You know, Leslie, right now things are much more calm here on the Capitol grounds. We're here at the intersection of First and Constitution. You can see police are still here in this area. Right now is secure, but just about 3 hours ago, things were much different. You can see this video we have of the parking lots just west of the Capitol building. There, Trump supporters gathered in the lot and stared down police. In response, DC police, Capitol Police, and the FBI made a line between them and the Capitol building. The president's supporters threw a few bottles toward police, and that was all before officers decided to ultimately surround them in a tactic that we've seen a couple of times this summer called kettling. Ultimately, they were able to disperse the crowd. Now, at this point, we're not sure how many people were taken into custody. However, we do know one Washington Post video journalist did post on Twitter that they were quickly detained and then released. Now, today's events occurred just yards away from the Capitol Hill neighborhood to the east of the Capitol building. Many people obviously lived there. And one woman actually summed up today for her as, quote, atrocious. Coming up later in the show, we'll tell you what locals there had to say about today's events. Leslie?
Yeah, this was happening in their neighborhood. It impacted them directly. All right, John, thank you. We're going to continue our coverage with Nathan Baca. He is live along 14th Street, not far from Freedom Plaza. Nathan, what's the view from where you are right now?
Well, the view right now is that things are quiet. However, what we noticed before, and we're going to show you some video, was some tense moments whenever some members of the Trump supporters were out there wanting to leave their hotel lobbies, go onto the street to do something as mundane as get dinner. However, DC Metropolitan Police blocked that. They came in force, outnumbering the protesters in many cases by 2 to 3 times. And then you get this back and forth where the police would get more and more and start to tell people, like, no, you cannot leave. And in effect, what happens is that they're in the lobby. Now, I've actually just been in the lobby for the past few minutes, just listening in on what is going on, the mindset. First off, a lot of it is just mundane talk about where to get dinner, and then also trying to figure out as far as flights to get out. So many of the people here plan to leave tomorrow. However, another thing that goes on inside this hotel lobby, it's a convention of sorts where people of like minds are starting to talk about conspiracy theories or these theories about what actually happened in their mind in the Capitol. You start hearing the word false flag quite a bit, something that is completely not true. So reporting live out here near Freedom Plaza, Nathan Baca, WUSA 9.
So basically they came here to make a mess, to leave chaos, and then leave. That's essentially what they did today. We'll talk more about this a little bit later. A lot happened today, so let's walk you through it. It all started when President Trump spoke at a rally this morning. He continued making untrue remarks and told supporters he won the election. Shortly after, some of those rioters stormed the Capitol, breached the steps, and made it inside. And Tom Dempsey joins us live to walk us through those moments. Tom?
Well, Leslie, the only word to really describe what the experience was like being outside the United States Capitol building earlier today would be surreal. The United States Capitol building, such a symbol of the United States of America and its history, but we spent hours outside the Capitol building earlier today. We could see people scaling the walls, desperately trying to get inside. We saw people rushing the doors. Some people even got inside the Capitol building, as we know earlier today. Hours later, it's a much different scene. I'll step outside of the way so I can kind of walk you through what we're seeing. You know, a small pocket of police officers are standing guard here. There's a barricade now up towards the Supreme Court building. We used to be able to get pretty up close to the Capitol building hours ago, but a much different story now. We've seen Maryland state troopers walking around the grounds. We even saw bomb-sniffing dogs earlier today roaming about the grounds. Again, lots of law enforcement, federal law enforcement, state troopers on the grounds of the Capitol building right now after a truly violent and deadly day. What started as a day of rallies for supporters of President Donald Trump calling to overturn election results while pointing to unfounded claims of fraud turned to deadly chaos on Wednesday afternoon. A riot breaking out on the steps of the U.S. Capitol as thousands waved flags and chanted nearby. Things quickly turned violent with the mob pushing past police. Around 2 p.m., maskless rioters surged past barricades, entering inside the Capitol as Congress counted electoral votes in the presidential election.
Without objection, the chair declares the House in recess pursuant to Clause 12B of Rule 1.
With the situation leading to an evacuation, violence inside brought gunfire, with one woman getting shot and killed. Pictures posted to social media showed parts of the mob infiltrating the offices of elected leaders and even the Senate chamber. Police later used tear gas to try and clear the site as D.C. National Guard and federal law enforcement responded. As protests continued and crowds grew just outside the Capitol building, things began to quiet down when President Trump tweeted for supporters to go home. As the evening went on, law enforcement and National Guard troops pushed out protesters and reinforced barricades, putting an end to a riot targeting the U.S. Capitol. A live look at the U.S. Capitol building at this hour. Again, law enforcement has a line of officers guarding the grounds at this hour. A much different story, Leslie. Much quieter right now. Again, we've seen state troopers, federal law enforcement right now, and very clear to see that order has been restored to the grounds here. Live outside the U.S. Capitol building, I'm Tom Dempsey, WUSA 9.
Hey, Tom, before I let you go, you called this a surreal moment. What did you hear those rioters saying as they charged toward the Capitol? Could you hear them chanting something?
You know, I didn't hear them chanting something, but I do remember one chant and phrase I'll remember hearing from the rioters was one person saying, we outnumber you. And he was talking to the police officers. And Leslie, it's just amazing, as you know, as I was saying, amazing, surreal, again, that word, knowing just what the U.S. Capitol represents and to see people storming past these barricades. We saw all sorts of flags being waved. We saw United States flags. We saw Confederate flags being waved on the grounds of the United States Capitol building as they went through the barricades today. And they were, walking around the grounds out there as they were able to break through those barricades and really just cause chaos and violence on the grounds today, Leslie.
Yeah, you saw it up close. We saw it from a distance. Either way, it was a stark, disturbing scene. Tom, thank you. I want to bring Adam Longo into the conversation. Adam, you spoke with someone who was inside the Capitol when this all went down?
That's right. Somebody who wasn't invited but didn't necessarily have to force his way inside either. Perhaps by now you've seen all the videos here taken inside of the Capitol by people who were part of this insurrection to try and stop Congress from doing its constitutional duty to certify the election. So I talked to the self-proclaimed citizen journalist who shot this video about what he witnessed on this unprecedented day of democracy in danger.
I was quite excited to see this going on.
So you're saying you approve of what happened today?
Do I approve of what happened today?
Yes.
I approve 100%.
Let me be crystal clear. Steve Baker, who shot this video inside the rotunda, was part of the mob that penetrated the Capitol building. An angry mob hell-bent on destruction and deviation from democracy. Their actions led to a woman's death right in the hallways of where freedom's veins pulse through the corridors connecting the two chambers of Congress.
I didn't know that it was a shot until I rounded a corner, and what ended up happening was I had a young female officer that came over to me and took me by the arm and said, "Sir, I want to escort you out of here safely." And I went, "What are you talking about?" And she's moving me towards the door, and she said, "Sir, do you feel safe? Do you first feel safe?" And I said, "Well, do you feel safe?" And she goes, "No, I don't." And I said, "What's the problem?" And right then on our left was the girl who had been shot, and they were working on her and giving her CPR at that moment. And there was just blood everywhere.
At one point in its terrorizing tour of the Capitol, that mob made its way to Statuary Hall and then inside House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's office.
Once they got to Pelosi's office, there was some damage done. They tore up Pelosi's signs that enter her office area, flipped over some tables, some chairs, things like that. That's as much of that I saw before the police came in and started stopping that from happening.
So you were inside of the Speaker's office?
Yeah.
Okay, and there were 10, 20, 30, 50 people inside the Speaker's office?
Probably anywhere from 20 to 30 at the time that I got there. They were taking souvenirs, like tearing her sign. They broke the actual first sign you see going into. They tore that off and broke it into little pieces for souvenirs.
Now, one of the most pressing and looming questions hanging over this horribly historic moment is, how could this have happened? How are the authorities so overwhelmed and seemingly underprepared? Coming up in a couple minutes, you are going to be shocked by what I was told by a member of Congress from Tennessee who was sheltering in his office with a bird's eye view of what was unfolding on the Capitol grounds. Strong allegations against the Capitol Police. We'll see you again in a moment.
A lot of people have some of those same questions, Adam. Thank you. Today's violence appears to have shaken the Trump administration leadership. Top White House aides are resigning tonight, and our partners at CBS News report members of the cabinet are discussing invoking the 25th Amendment. That would remove President Trump from office and elevate Vice President Pence for the final days of this administration. CBS's Margaret Brennan reports they are concerned about what could happen in the remaining 2 weeks. She also notes that this has not formally been brought to the vice president. Well, it was certainly terrifying for the lawmakers and their staff members who were working when those rioters stormed Capitol Hill. The buildings were placed on lockdown. Delia Gonsalves joins me now. Dee, you've been out all day. You've been talking with several people on the Hill. We watched it from the outside, but they experienced it.
Yeah, it was a frightening ordeal and a very long day for a lot of congressmen and women that we spoke to today. We're here live at First and Independence Southeast on the southeast side of the Capitol, where you can see some emergency crews are on standby, but a very different scene from what we saw earlier this afternoon when police in riot gear were getting ready to storm the grounds of the Capitol. they were only mobilizing more than an hour after Trump supporters had stormed through the Capitol building. We talked to a lot of congressmen and women who were evacuated, were sheltering in place. Many, I'm told, were in underground bunker. Their staff members inside the House office buildings here. A lot of them were inside as well and on lockdown. So I talked to these congressmen and women. Many of them wouldn't share their locations with me, obviously, for security reasons, but they did share their thoughts and some very detailed play-by-play of what happened inside. Take a listen.
At a certain point, the Capitol Police came in the chamber and said that the protesters had breached the first floor. They asked us to, they locked all the doors. They stayed on the inside, asked us to stay in our chairs. Debate resumed. Then another report came in quickly after that by the police that the protesters were in the rotunda, which was right down the hall from us. And at that point, debate was suspended. It was suspended for probably quite a little while, maybe 15 minutes. And then we were given instructions. They tried to start debate back up again, did briefly. Then instructions then came through that we should look under our chairs for gas masks. Every other chair had a gas mask, and they asked us to get those out, be ready to put those on. Eventually, there was pounding on the doors on one side of the chamber, and when the doors were being pounded on, they asked us to evacuate.
I've never seen anything like this. I was really horrified that we saw a violent mob essentially overrun the Capitol of the United States, running over the floor of the Senate and the House, taking down American flags in front of the Capitol, replacing them with Trump flags. And this is supposed to be a moment where we respect the peaceful transfer of power.
Whether it's 10 hours, which it could be, or whether it's tomorrow or the next day, you know, I'm going to be on the floor of the House of Representatives voting to certify the election of President-elect Biden and Vice President Harris. That is our democratic constitutional responsibility.
I do feel sad because we thought this couldn't happen in our country, and obviously it can. So, but now I mostly feel strong resolve to keep fighting for the ideals that this country truly stands for.
I don't know why Donald Trump spent 3.5 hours watching this on TV before issuing some sort of a statement, and the statement was very weak. If this had been protesters of any other ilk, they would have busted heads, they would have locked people up, they would have tear gassed them and water hosed them, and they'd be in jail right now.
And that was the voice of Congressmember Kwesi Mfume of Baltimore. He used to be the president of the NAACP. Listen, Les, there was one common theme amongst all these lawmakers in the midst of all this chaos, anger, and violence: resolve. They want to get back to doing their job. Les, back to you.
Let's hope they can all do it with some unity and get this back on track. All right, Dee, thank you. Let's focus on the police response now. MPD is the lead law enforcement agency securing the Capitol, and we know officers are across the city tonight. Mike Valerio has the latest reporting on that front. But Mike, first, we want to talk about this delay in sending in the National Guard. What happened?
I mean, Leslie, a major delay. And on that storyline, we know that the Defense Department initially denied D.C.'s request to have more National Guard troops not only surround the Capitol, but secure the Capitol complex after a request was made by D.C. council members, as well as the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. And we know from D.C. council members, when they sent a statement with furious language in the heat of the chaos, in the throes of the chaos, that request was denied. They sent it out to all of us members of the media through Twitter, sort of with incredulity, sort of asking why and what happened here. But Leslie, we know that it had to do with the top of the command here. Ryan McCarthy, the Army Secretary, spoke with Mayor Bowser earlier this evening, and he said that for his part, it took about a half hour in those stressful moments to iron out the request, and then he had to send the request to the Secretary of the Army, or the Secretary of Defense rather, who serves at the pleasure of the president, and he intimated that it was that moment that held up the request. We're trying to have some more reporting from our colleagues inside the West Wing to iron out what exactly happened there, but that seems to be the crux of the holdup, why more National Guard troops were not deployed to the Capitol immediately. But the Capitol, as you heard, Leslie, is secure. MPD, the main law enforcement agency there, Chief Conte is operating out of an emergency operations center in Judiciary Square, where he himself is in control of all of the officers who have come in from as far as New Jersey that are securing the complex for the overnight hours into tomorrow morning. Leslie.
It is a mammoth task for his first full week as the new chief of the D.C. Police Department. All right, let's continue this conversation about police. Adam Longo is back with some perspective on that.
So let me just be real for a second, Les. I've had a number of people reach out to me today and tell me that had the Black Lives Matter protesters done any of this back in June, we'd be looking at a body count a lot higher than today. That said, I spoke with a congressman from Tennessee, Democrat Jim Cooper of Nashville, who's leveling an alarming and frankly shocking allegation against the Capitol Police that they were somehow complicit in allowing the Capitol to be breached. This is a congressman. Listen to a bit of our conversation.
Some people are worried today that some of the police were complicit with the protesters. It's one thing to be friendly and to de-escalate, the violence. But it's another thing to take selfies with them and to tacitly let them go through the lines.
Did you see that yourself, sir?
I haven't. I've been pulled up in my office, but I've never seen a crowd that's less afraid of the police than this one.
Are you saying that you have the belief that some of the Capitol Police officers and other members of law enforcement were complicit in the actions that unfolded today?
At best, they were overwhelmed and did not anticipate what they had been warned of for 10 days by Trump, in which he said even this morning he would join the protest and go to the Capitol. At best, they were overwhelmed. At worst, they let this protest proceed unlike any other.
Congressman Cooper compared what we saw today to 1814, when British troops torched the Capitol and forced Congress out of the building. Now, he was still barricaded in his office at the Longworth office building when I talked to him about 6:30 tonight, and he thought Congress might have to reconvene elsewhere before the leadership decided to proceed at the Capitol after it was cleared, and that's what they are doing right now. Les?
They sure are, Ads. Thank you. Let's get real about the events of today, and perhaps we should start with the elephant in the room.
Nerve-wracking it is.
On social media, in conversations, in some of the reporting that you're hearing, conversations by phone and text, it is clear that this historic and violent and chaotic day exposed how this country and the people who enforce its laws value the lives of certain Americans. Remember June? Swift and heavy force met peaceful protesters marching to demonstrate Black Lives Matter. Those images are forever imprinted in our consciousness. Compare that to today and the hours upon hours of images where we saw a mob roaming the United States Capitol after they'd stormed it before law enforcement stepped in to save our democracy. Actions fueled by the words of a president who pushed them to take their anger to the streets. Anger over an election he lost fair and square. Now, they came intent on creating more fissures in a nation with new fault lines uncovered by these unfounded claims like this election stole their vote. It didn't. They lost. And perhaps today will be a turning point. I sure hope so. But what's clear is these domestic terrorists won't go quietly into their good night. Not even a curfew can ensure that. Two systems of justice, a divide illuminated once again, this time at the citadel of democracy. George Floyd died 330 days ago, and tonight a jury says he was murdered.
Find the defendant guilty.
A former Minneapolis officer is guilty on all charges.
Derek Chauvin's been found guilty!
A moment of reckoning here at home and all across the country.
This means unity. This means peace. This means justice. Justice for all.
Accountability will be served.
This is a start where things can be better.
George Floyd's death sparked a movement, and some say the fight is just beginning.
The verdict was right. work has to continue.
Live from the nation's capital, this is WUSA 9 News at 11. This is a day most of us will never forget. A jury said it is not okay for a police officer to kill a black man. Derek Chauvin is guilty of all charges in the death of George Floyd. You can see the emotion, you can feel it across the country and right here at home. Many of you, our neighbors, are relieved that accountability will be served in this case. This picture just about sums it up. That's London Williams visiting from Pennsylvania. He and countless others were brought to tears in Black Lives Matter Plaza when the verdict came down. I know a lot of people felt the same way when that verdict was read. Good evening, I'm Leslie Foster. You and I, we've been talking about George Floyd's death for nearly a year. We can now say it was murder. It was. A jury found Derek Chauvin guilty of all 3 charges he faced. There's a lot to this story, and we're going to put it into context for you, what happened and what comes next. We begin tonight with breaking news. A 4-year-old boy and his mother shot just hours ago in Northwest D.C. That is 3 children shot in 3 separate shootings over the course of 3 days. I'm Leslie Foster, and I hate that we're talking about this, but we have to because children's lives are in danger. The other big story we're following tonight is that building collapse in D.C. where people could have died. We are happy to say that did not happen, but this was a close call, and it could have had a very different ending. So tonight, we know 5 construction workers were injured in this collapse. We're told they are all in the hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. But that may not tell the full story. The collapse happened while many of us were dealing with this. Another large storm sweeping across Virginia, D.C., and Maryland, bringing strong winds and torrential rain. Video shows that pouring rain, and then at the top of the screen, see that right there? That's the building coming down. It's a mess of wood and debris. And first responders were on that scene in minutes. 4 workers were already out on their own, but one of them was still trapped inside. A painstaking hour and a half evolved, and it ended with this moment. That man pulled from the rubble and carefully brought down on a stretcher. That team from D.C. Fire and EMS, hailed heroes, well, they couldn't have done it without this guy, a rescue canine on his first mission. And this building that collapsed was under construction on Kennedy Street near 9th Street in Northwest. The investigation into what happened is just beginning. Our team has some new reporting on this building and some prior complaints about it. We're going to start with Mike Valerio. And Mike, tell us what we know right now about the investigation.